The trouble began on a muggy August morning, when I noticed a row of metal stakes glinting along the edge of my property. They weren't mine. My land, a modest 5 acres backing onto a creek, had been in my family for decades. The creek, part of a shared easement, was a quiet haven for my bees and a daily route for walks with Pixel, my collie. But now those stakes marked a line that cut off my access, planted squarely on what I knew was my side of the boundary. Karen Davis, my neighbor and self-appointed HOA enforcer, was behind it. I'd seen her packing the property line the week before, muttering about encroachment and gesturing wildly at my wildflower patch. Karen had a reputation. She'd once fined a neighbor $200 for a mailbox that was half an inch too tall. When I approached her that morning, survey map in hand, she was already hammering a no trespassing sign into the dirt. "Karen, this is my land," I said, keeping my tone even. "The easement's been here since 1963. You can't block the creek." Her eyes narrowed, platinum blonde hair catching the sun. "You're mistaken," she snapped. "The HOA approved my fence. Your flowers are a nuisance, attracting pests." She waved at my beehives 50 yards away like they were a personal affront. I unrolled the survey map, pointing to the clearly marked boundary. "This says otherwise. You're on my property." Karen scoffed, snatching the map and tossing it onto the grass. "We'll see about that." She pulled out her phone, dialed 911, and demanded the sheriff. I stood there, stunned but not entirely surprised. Karen didn't negotiate, she dominated. Deputy Rogers arrived 20 minutes later, his patrol car kicking up dust on the gravel road. A stocky man with a no-nonsense mustache, he listened as Karen ranted about squatters and illegal landscaping. I handed him my documents, the survey, deed, and easement agreement, all notarized. Rogers skimmed them, glanced at the stakes, and turned to Karen. "Ma'am, these stakes are on his property," he said, voice flat. "You'll need to move them. Have a pleasant day." He tipped his hat and headed back to his car. Karen's face reddened, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. I expected her to back down, most people would, but as Rogers drove off, she jabbed a finger at me. "This isn't over," she hissed, storming back to her McMansion. I picked up my map, brushed off the dirt, and sighed. Pixel nudged my hand, tail wagging. I thought that was the end of it, a petty dispute settled by paperwork and a deputy's common sense. But Karen Davis wasn't the type to let a loss slide. She was already planning her next move, and I was about to learn just how far she'd go. 2 weeks after Deputy Rogers sent Karen packing, I came home to a scene that turned my stomach. My new cedar fence, built to replace the stakes Karen had tried to claim, was slashed in 3 places. The wood splintered like it had been hacked with an axe. Deep tire tracks gouged the mud near the creek, and one of my beehives lay in ruins, frames scattered like broken toys, honey oozing into the grass. The air buzzed with confused bees, their home destroyed. Worst of all, Pixel, my collie, limped toward me, whimpering, a nail embedded in her paw from a crude nailboard half buried by the fence line. I knelt beside her, heart pounding, and gently pried the nail free. Blood welled up and Pixel yelped. The vet, Dr. Larson, cleaned the wound, prescribed antibiotics, and warned me to watch for infection. "This wasn't an accident," she said, frowning at the nailboard I'd brought in. "Someone meant harm." Her words lit a fire in me. I was done playing nice. That night, I ordered 4 motion sensor cameras with night vision, set to ping my phone every 10 seconds until I silenced them. I also called Nora Beltran, a licensed surveyor with a reputation for being as tough as she was precise. She arrived the next day, her pickup loaded with gear. "Let's make this crystal clear," she said, eyeing the wrecked fence. By noon, she'd planted fluorescent orange stakes at my property's corners and attached laminated placards to each one, warning of criminal penalties for tampering with survey monuments. "Good luck to anyone dumb enough to mess with these," she said with a grin. I felt a flicker of hope, but Karen wasn't deterred. At 1:13 a.m., my phone lit up with camera alerts. I opened the live stream and froze. 2 figures in hoodies crept along the creek, one yanking Nora's stakes from the ground, the other clutching bolt cutters. They tossed the stakes into the water, the splash muffled but unmistakable. Moonlight caught the taller figure's face, angular with a scruffy beard. The shorter one turned, and even through the grainy feed, I recognized Karen's platinum blonde hair, glinting like a beacon. I called Deputy Rogers at dawn, forwarding the footage. He met me at the property an hour later, his jaw tight as he watched the video on my phone. "That's Chandler Hayes," he said, pointing to the bearded figure. "Local troublemaker, been in and out of trouble since high school." Rogers knew Chandler from past calls, petty theft, bar fights, nothing major until now. "And that," he added, pausing on Karen's face, "is your neighbor. Let's have a chat with them." Rogers secured a warrant for criminal mischief and trespassing by noon. At Chandler's rundown trailer, he and two deputies knocked, body cams rolling. Chandler answered in pajama pants, bleary-eyed, claiming he'd been asleep all night. Rogers held up a still from my camera, Chandler mid-grimace, bolt cutters in hand. "Care to explain this?" Rogers asked. Chandler's mouth snapped shut, his bravado gone. Karen was next. Rogers found her at home, sipping coffee in a pristine kitchen. She denied everything, but a search of her garage turned up Nora's fluorescent stakes, the laminated placards, and a half-empty can of red spray paint, same shade as the graffiti defacing my no trespassing signs. Karen stammered that Chandler had stored tools there without her knowledge, but Rogers wasn't buying it. "Ma'am, you're on camera," he said, cuffing her. "Let's go." Both were hauled to county jail. Karen made bond by lunch, her lawyer already spinning excuses. Chandler wasn't so lucky. Rogers dug into his record and found a 2021 check kiting conviction still under probation. The vandalism charge triggered a no-bond hold pending a revocation hearing. He'd be sitting in a cell for a while. I spent the afternoon with Nora, resetting the stakes and repairing the fence. Pixel, bandaged but wagging, stayed close. The cameras stayed up, now joined by Fifth overlooking the creek. I wasn't just defending my land anymore, I was building a case. Karen and Chandler thought they could bully me into submission, but they'd underestimated me. Rogers called that evening, his voice grim but satisfied. "We've got them dead to rights," he said, "but stay sharp, Karen's not the type to quit." As I watched the sunset over the creek, Pixel's head resting on my knee, I knew he was right. This wasn't over. But with the evidence piling up, I was ready for whatever came next. With Karen out on bond and Chandler stuck in county jail, I thought the worst was behind me. The cameras kept watch over my property, Pixel's paw was healing, and Nora's fluorescent stake stood firm. But the fight was far from over. It was about to get bigger. My lawyer, Elliot Crane, a wiry man with a knack for spotting financial discrepancies, suggested we dig deeper. "Karen's gate wasn't cheap," he said, squinting at the HOA's newsletter boasting about her approved fence. "Let's see where the money came from." Elliot subpoenaed the HOA's financial records, focusing on the $3,500 used to buy the gate Karen had unlawfully installed across my easement. What we found was a bombshell. A cashier's check signed by Chandler Hayes, drawn from the HOA's reserve account. The gate was just the tip of the iceberg. As Elliot combed through the records, he uncovered a trail of checks totaling $46,900, all written by Chandler for grounds improvements that never happened. Phantom landscaping projects, non-existent tree trimmings, and a $12,000 irrigation upgrade for a system that didn't exist. The HOA board, a group of well-meaning but overworked volunteers, was blindsided. They voted unanimously to press charges against Chandler. The county's white-collar crime unit took over, assigning Detective Miriam Page, a sharp investigator with a no-nonsense ponytail and a reputation for unraveling fraud. She seized Chandler's home computer and found a goldmine: forged receipts, fake HOA meeting minutes, and a Word template for neon green approved stamps used on fraudulent documents. Page's team traced several payments to an account labeled consulting fees. The account belonged to Karen Davis. Nearly $15,000 of the HOA's money had been funneled to her, disguised as legitimate work. "Consulting on what?" Elliot muttered. "How to ruin a neighborhood." Karen lawyered up fast. Her attorney, James Hall, charged $600 an hour and stonewalled every question. But Chandler, facing probation revocation for his 2021 check kiting scheme and new felony charges for theft and fraud, was desperate. In a cramped interrogation room with Page leaning across the table, he cracked. "I'll testify," he said, voice shaky. "Karen planned it all. The gate, the stakes, the money. She told me what to write, where to send it." He claimed Karen had promised him a cut of the profits if the HOA could annex my land for a community expansion. It was a long shot, but Chandler, drowning in debt, had gone along. Page's investigation widened. She found emails between Karen and Chandler, vague but incriminating, discussing moving the line and covering costs. One message from Karen read, "Make sure the board doesn't ask questions." The evidence was damning, but Karen's lawyer filed motions to suppress it, claiming the emails were private correspondence. Elliot countered with a meticulous timeline, tying the emails to the dates of the fraudulent checks. The judge sided with us. Meanwhile, small victories piled up. The HOA, horrified by the betrayal, sent me a letter of apology signed by all 7 board members. They also replaced the defaced no trespassing signs on my property and promised to review their oversight policies. Nora Beltran, my surveyor, stopped by to check her stakes and brought coffee. "You're making enemies, but the right kind," she said with a wink. Pixel's paw healed fully, and she bounded along the creek again, chasing dragonflies. But the biggest win came when Page called with an update. Chandler's testimony, combined with the financial records and my camera footage, had strengthened the case against Karen. The DA was preparing charges: felony theft, conspiracy, and criminal mischief on top of the existing trespassing count. "She's not slipping out of this," Paige said, "and Chandler's not going anywhere either." As I stood on my porch, watching the bees hum around their rebuilt hive, I felt a quiet resolve. Karen and Chandler had tried to take what was mine: my land, my peace, my dog's safety, but they'd failed. The legal wheels were turning, and for the first time I wasn't just reacting, I was winning. Elliot was already drafting a civil suit to recover damages, and I knew Karen's days of bullying were numbered. The creek sparkled under the afternoon sun, and Pixel nudged my hand. We were ready for the next round. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, a fitting stage for the end of Karen Davis's reign of terror. After months of legal wrangling, the trial arrived, and the county courthouse buzzed with neighbors, HOA members, and even a local reporter scribbling notes. Chandler Hayes, already serving 18 months for violating his probation on the 2021 check kiting charge, had taken a plea deal to lessen his new felony charges. In exchange for a 4-year sentence with parole eligibility in 2, he agreed to testify against Karen. And testify he did with a clarity that silenced the room. Under oath, Chandler laid out the scheme. Karen had masterminded the land grab, promising him a slice of my property once the HOA annexed it for her imagined community expansion. She coached him on forging HOA documents, funneling funds to her account, and even cutting my fence to send a message. Chandler's voice wavered as he described their late-night vandalism, caught on my motion sensor cameras. "She said no one would care about a few stakes," he muttered, avoiding Karen's glare from the defense table. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Lena Torres, played the trump card. Footage from my Ring camera, timestamp 12:47 a.m. on the night Nora's survey stakes vanished. The grainy video showed Karen and Chandler loading rebar into her SUV, her platinum blonde hair unmistakable under the moonlight. The jury leaned forward, eyes locked on the screen. Torres followed with the financial evidence: $46,900 in fraudulent HOA checks, $15,000 of which landed in Karen's account as consulting fees. My own losses: $32,000 for the fence, beehive, Pixel's vet bills, and legal fees, were documented in receipts and Nora's survey reports. The defense, led by Karen's $600 an hour attorney James Hall, tried to paint Chandler as the sole mastermind, but the jury wasn't buying it. Karen's emails, her garage full of stolen stakes, and her face on my camera told a different story. After a 3-day trial, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours. The foreman read the verdict: guilty on all counts for both defendants: felony conspiracy, theft, criminal mischief, and misdemeanor trespassing. Chandler, already incarcerated, bowed his head. Karen, dressed in a crisp blazer like she was attending a board meeting, went pale. The judge revoked her bond, ordering her into custody. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, with $32,000 in restitution to me and $46,900 to the HOA. A 5-year no-contact order would follow her release, barring her from so much as stepping near my land. As Karen was led away in cuffs, I caught her eye. She glared, lips pursed, but I gave her a small, polite wave, not out of spite, but because it felt like closing a book. The courtroom emptied, and Elliot, my lawyer, clapped my shoulder. "You did good," he said. "Now let's get that civil suit rolling." I nodded, but my mind was already elsewhere, on the land I'd fought so hard to keep. Back home, the creek sparkled under a late autumn sun, and Pixel bounded through the grass, her paw fully healed. The bees, resilient as ever, hummed around their rebuilt hive. I started planning a greenhouse where Karen's illegal gate once stood, a place for tomato starts and herbs, something to nurture rather than fight over. The HOA, still reeling from the scandal, sent a check for $4,500 to cover the beehive repairs, drawn from Chandler's frozen assets. Their new board, led by a retired teacher named Marla, promised transparency and invited me to their next meeting. I declined politely. I'd had enough of HOA politics, but it felt like a step toward healing. That evening, I walked the property line with Nora Beltran, who'd become an unexpected friend. She checked her stakes, still fluorescent and untouched. "You turned this mess into something solid," she said, gesturing to the land. "Not many could." I shrugged, but her words stuck. The fight had cost me time, money, and sleep, but it had also shown me what I was capable of. Pixel nudged my hand, and I scratched her ears, grateful for her loyalty through it all. The greenhouse went up the following week, its frame rising against the skyline. I planted the first seeds: basil, cilantro, a few heirloom tomatoes, and the smell of fresh soil filled the air. It was a small act, but it felt monumental, like reclaiming the land not just from Karen, but from the chaos she'd brought. The bees buzzed nearby, and Pixel sprawled in the sun, chasing a butterfly in her dreams. For the first time in months, I felt not just relief, but possibility. The war was over, and this was my new beginning. With Karen behind bars and Chandler locked away, a quiet settled over my 5 acres. The creek babbled as it always had, the bees hummed in their rebuilt hive, and Pixel, my collie, trotted happily along the property line, her paw fully healed. The fluorescent stakes Nora planted stood like sentinels, no longer a target but a symbol of victory. The legal battle had drained me, sleepless nights, endless calls with Elliot, and a $32,000 hole in my savings. But standing on my porch, watching the sun dip below the pines, I felt something new, peace, hard-earned and deeply mine. The HOA, shaken by the fraud scandal, was undergoing a transformation. The new board, led by Marla, the retired teacher, sent me a letter typed on crisp letterhead. It was a formal apology for oversights during prior management, signed by all 7 members. Enclosed was a check for $4,500 drawn from Chandler's seized assets to cover the cost of repairing my beehive and replacing the frames. "We hope this begins to mend the trust," Marla wrote. I deposited the check not because I needed the gesture, but because it felt like the community taking a step forward. I wrote back, thanking them and wishing Marla luck. HOA meetings weren't my thing, but I appreciated the effort. The real turning point came when I decided to build a greenhouse on the patch of land Karen had tried to annex with her illegal gate. It was a defiant act, but also a hopeful one. I hired a local contractor, a quiet man named Tom who'd heard about the drama and offered a discount. "Anyone who stands up to a bully like that deserves a break," he said, hammering the first support beam. The greenhouse took shape over 2 weeks, its glass panels catching the morning light like a prism. I filled it with trays of soil, planting basil, tomatoes, and peppers, crops that would thrive in the spring. The air smelled of earth and possibility, a stark contrast to the tension that had hung over the land months before. The bees seemed to approve. Their hive, now reinforced with extra frames, was buzzing with activity. I'd lost half a colony in Karen's vandalism, but the survivors were resilient, already producing honey again. I spent hours tending them, the rhythmic hum calming my nerves. Pixel, ever my shadow, sprawled nearby, chasing the occasional grasshopper or napping in the sun. Her limp was gone, and her energy was back, her tail wagging as she explored the secure land. One afternoon, I caught her sniffing the greenhouse door, curious about the new smells. "You'll get your own tomato soon," I promised, scratching her ears. The community started to feel different, too. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to before stopped by, some with questions about the trial, others just to chat. A woman named Clara, who lived 2 streets over, brought me a jar of her homemade peach jam. "Heard you took on Karen and won," she said, grinning. "About time someone did." I invited her in for coffee, and we talked about the creek, the bees, anything but the HOA. It was small, but it felt like the neighborhood was knitting itself back together, one conversation at a time. Elliot called with an update on the civil suit. The $32,000 in restitution from Karen was a start, but her prison wages, $58 a month, wouldn't cover it anytime soon. The civil case aimed to seize her assets, including her McMansion, which was now on the market. "It's a long game," Elliot said, "but we'll get you whole." I thanked him, but my focus was shifting. The money mattered, but the land, the bees, and Pixel's wagging tail mattered more. One evening, as I watered the greenhouse, Nora swung by with a 6-pack of local cider. "Thought you could use a toast," she said, cracking one open. We sat on the porch, watching the fireflies blink over the creek. "You didn't just win a fight," she said, raising her bottle. "You made this place yours again." I clinked my bottle against hers, feeling the weight of her words. The greenhouse glowed softly in the dusk, its seedlings reaching for the sky. The bees droned, Pixel snored at my feet, and for the first time in a year, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. This wasn't just a fresh start, it was a reclamation. Karen's schemes had tried to take my home, but they'd only made me fight harder for it. The land was mine, not just on paper, but in the dirt under my nails, the honey in my jars, and the dog curled up beside me. Whatever came next, I was ready. A year after Karen's conviction, my land felt like a sanctuary again. The greenhouse thrived, its tomato vines heavy with fruit, and the bees buzzed contentedly in their hive, producing honey sweeter than ever. Pixel, my collie, patrolled the creek with her tail high, no trace of the limp from that awful nailboard. The fluorescent stakes Nora had planted stood untouched, their warning placards faded but firm. I thought the drama was behind me, a closed chapter marked by restitution checks and a quiet victory. But life, like the creek, has a way of circling back. It started with a letter, delivered in a crisp envelope with a law firm's logo. Elaine Castor, claiming to be Karen's cousin and heir, insisted Karen had granted her a private right-of-way across my land before her incarceration. The document attached was a deed dated suspiciously just before Karen's arrest, notarized by an out-of-state clerk. My stomach sank, another scheme, another attempt to claw at what I'd fought for. I called Elliot, my lawyer, who laughed dryly when I read him the letter. "This smells like Karen's handwriting," he said. "Let's bury it." Elliot and Nora got to work. Nora cross-referenced her survey records, confirming the deed's boundary lines didn't match any legal description of my property. Elliot dug into the notary, discovering she'd been disciplined for backdating documents. Within a week, we had proof the deed was forged, likely a desperate ploy by Karen from prison to create leverage or force a settlement. Elliot filed a motion to dismiss, and Elaine, faced with our evidence, withdrew her claim before the court hearing. She didn't have the stomach for a real fight, Elliot said, grinning. I exhaled, grateful for their vigilance. The creek stayed mine undisturbed. Then came an unexpected windfall. The state's crime victim fund sent me a restitution check for $1,200, the first of many drawn from Karen's prison wages. At $58 a month, it would take decades to cover the $32,000 she owed me, let alone the $46,900 to the HOA, but the symbolism mattered. Each check was a reminder that justice, however slow, was grinding forward. I used the money to buy new beehive frames, reinforcing the colony Karen had tried to destroy. The bees didn't care about courtrooms, but they thrived on my care, and that felt like enough. The biggest surprise arrived in a plain envelope from the county jail. It was a letter from Chandler Hayes, written in neat, careful script. He'd earned a paralegal certificate while incarcerated, part of a rehabilitation program. I know I can't undo what I did, he wrote. I was greedy and Karen used that. I'm sorry for the damage to your land, your dog, your peace. Enclosed was a hand-drawn map of my property with suggestions for planting an orchard, apple and pear trees along the creek where the soil was richest. Just a thought, he added. I owe you more than lines on paper. I sat on the porch, Pixel curled at my feet, and read the letter twice. Chandler's apology didn't erase the bolt cutters or the stolen stakes, but it was something proof that people could change or at least try. I wrote back, keeping it brief. Thanks for the map, I said. The sunflowers are taller than ever this year. Keep learning. I didn't promise forgiveness, but I mailed the letter, feeling lighter. The orchard idea wasn't half bad. Maybe I'd plant a tree or two come spring. The seasons turned and the land reflected the shift. The greenhouse yielded its first harvest, juicy tomatoes and fragrant basil that I shared with Clara, the neighbor who'd brought me peach jam. She invited me to a potluck, and I went, surprised by how easy it felt to laugh with folks I'd once kept at a distance. The HOA, under Marla's steady hand, sent out newsletters about community gardens and creek cleanups, a far cry from Karen's reign of fines and threats. Pixel chased fireflies along the creek, her barks echoing in the dusk, and I realized this place wasn't just my home, it was my community too. As I tended the bees one crisp morning, I thought about Chandler's map and Karen's fatting schemes. The land had seen greed, sabotage, and redemption, all in the span of a year. It had carried me through the fight and given me a place to rebuild. I brushed dirt from my hands, the scent of honey in the air, and smiled. This was full circle, not just the end of a battle, but the start of something enduring. The creek flowed on, and so did I. Spring swept over my 5 acres with a burst of color. Sunflowers nodding along the creek, bees darting between wildflowers, and Pixel, my collie, racing through the grass, her tail a blur. The greenhouse hummed with life, its tomato vines climbing trellises, and the air carried the scent of fresh earth. Karen's prison sentence was halfway done, her restitution checks trickling in, and Chandler was serving his time, his orchard map tucked in a drawer for future consideration. The land was mine, not just on paper, but in every seed I'd planted. Yet the story wasn't over. It was about to take a turn that felt like poetry. Karen's McMansion, ceased to cover her debts, sat empty for months until a buyer emerged. Sprout Tomorrow, an organic farming nonprofit dedicated to community gardens and native pollinators. They purchased the property at auction, and their director, a wiry ecologist named Leela, knocked on my door one April morning. We heard about your fight, she said, her eyes bright. Your bees inspired us. Want to consult on planting pollinator beds where Karen's lawn used to be. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen had weaponized HOA rules to control her neighbors, and now her land would bloom for the community. I agreed, and Sprout Tomorrow wasted no time. Their first volunteer day drew a crowd, families, retirees, even a few HOA board members, including Marla, all wielding shovels and seed packets. I loaned them my brush cutter to clear Karen's overgrown lawn, and Deputy Rogers showed up in jeans, hauling wheelbarrows of compost. Figured I'd pitch in, he said with a grin. This beats serving warrants. Together, we transformed the lot into raised beds, planting milkweed, coneflowers, and lavender, magnets for bees and butterflies. Tomato vines and squash seedlings joined the mix, a nod to my greenhouse. The work was sweaty, communal, and deeply satisfying, like turning a scar into a garden. Leela and I walked the rows, planning irrigation. Karen thought she could own everything, Leela said, wiping dirt from her hands. Now this place belongs to everyone. I nodded, watching Pixel sniff a patch of clover. The volunteers laughed as they worked, kids tossing soil playfully, and Marla handed out water bottles. It was the opposite of Karen's reign, open, shared, alive. I caught Rogers joking with a neighbor about the time he cuffed Karen, and the laughter carried across the field. This wasn't just a garden, it was a reclamation, a middle finger to every stake she'd planted on my land. By midday, the beds were planted and the volunteers gathered for a break, passing around homemade lemonade. I shared a jar of my honey and Leela spread it on cornbread, declaring it the best thing I've tasted all year. We talked about expanding the garden, maybe adding a community apiary. Your bees could have cousins, Leela teased. I liked the idea, not just for the bees, but for the connection it would build. The HOA, once a battleground, was becoming a partner, with Marla already planning a pollinator workshop for the neighborhood. As the sun dipped, I stood back, taking it in. Karen's former lawn, once a sterile expanse of control, was now a patchwork of life, purple blooms, green shoots, and the hum of possibility. The volunteers packed up, leaving behind a sign, "Sprout Tomorrow Community Garden." It faced my property, a reminder of what we'd built from her ashes. Rogers clapped my shoulder as he left. "You started this, he said. Not many could have." I shrugged, but his words landed. This wasn't just my victory, it was ours. That night I sat on my porch with Pixel, the creek glinting under the stars. The garden's silhouette was visible across the boundary, its beds a testament to resilience. I thought of Karen, locked away, her schemes reduced to $58 checks, and Chandler maybe sketching another map in his cell. They tried to break me, but instead they'd broken ground for something better. The bees droned softly, and Pixel sighed, her head on my knee. The air smelled of lavender and earth, and I felt a quiet pride, not in winning a fight, but in planting something that would outlast it. Sprout Tomorrow's garden grew through the season, its blooms drawing monarchs and my bees alike. I walked the rows sometimes, helping Leela weed or train vines. Each step felt like a stitch, binding the wounds of the past. Karen's shadow was gone, replaced by roots and laughter. This was the final victory, not just over her, but for the land, the community, and the life I'd fought to keep. The creek flowed, the garden thrived, and I knew, whatever came next, we'd tend it together. By October, Sprout Tomorrow's community garden was a vibrant patchwork across Karen's former property. The nonprofit hosted a harvest dinner, tables laden with roasted butternut squash, garlic honey carrots, and heirloom tomato bruschetta, all grown steps from my greenhouse. Neighbors laughed under string lights, and Leela, the director, gave me a nod for my role in the saga. I shrugged it off, savoring a bite of honey-drizzled cornbread. The real victory was this: nourishment where hostility once stood. I'd built a barn that summer, permitted and sturdy, using reclaimed wood from Karen's old gate. It stood by the creek, a quiet monument to resilience, housing tools and dreams for the land. Pixel, my collie, darted through the fields, chasing scents, her spirit unbroken. The bees thrived, their honey now a staple at the garden's market stall. Karen's restitution checks arrived monthly, $58 tokens of accountability. They'd never erase the fight, but they funded new hive frames, tying her defeat to my renewal. The HOA, now a partner, planned a pollinator festival, and I agreed to teach a beekeeping class. The creek flowed, carrying away the last echoes of conflict. As I walked the garden's rows, the air thick with lavender, I felt peace, earned, rooted mine. The barn's shadow stretched across the land, and Pixel flopped beside me, content. This wasn't just closure, it was a beginning built from dirt and defiance. The community had turned Karen's legacy into growth, and I'd found my place in it. Whatever lay ahead, I'd face it with soil-stained hands and a dog by my side.